The views expressed in this interview are those of the individuals and do not reflect the official policy or position of the U.S. government, the Department of Defense, the U.S. Navy, or the Naval Postgraduate School. For questions, comments, and suggestions, please email us at tridentroompodcasthost@nps.edu and find us online at nps.edu/tridentroompodcast. Welcome to the Trident Room, brewer of stout conversation, unfiltered and on tap. In today's podcast, NPS student Mike Morris sits down and has a drink with East Asian Policy Advisor Dr. Michael A. Glosny.
Is the Belt and Road Initiative realistic, you think? Can they afford it? Because I have only one story from one country, so it doesn't, and I'm not going to name it, but suffice to say, the citizens of that country that I talk to and around and sitting down with drinks like you, is they don't like China because China has offered and they accepted these promises of billions in infrastructure investment,
right.
and none of it's materialized. But China is asking for the benefits back already without having actually invested anything. Now that's only one country.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's expansive or not. You know, I haven't done a study, and I'm not a China-focused guy, so I probably won't. It's not anytime soon.
Well, I mean, so there's a couple of levels at which to answer that question, right? Though I think you said, will it work? From the Chinese perspective, or is it realistic? Okay. From the Chinese perspective, it will be declared a glowing victory. It's Xi Jinping's baby. Whatever happens, it will be characterized. It will be characterized as a great victory for China, for the Chinese people, for China being a responsible power, no matter what happens. Now, in terms of what it will look like on the ground, countries are in a difficult situation, right? They don't like China, they don't trust China, but the argument from the United States of, don't take this money because in 20 years you might not be able to pay it back, and if you can't pay it back, then you're going to have to give China something else, so don't take this money today, is not a very compelling argument.
Message.
And I think we have seen the Belt and Road Initiative spurring some other countries that are allies and partners to try to recognize, hey, there actually is really a need here for these countries to develop infrastructure as a way to help them grow. So we've seen Japan start to get into this game a little bit more. The United States is launching new initiatives to do so. But I think we need to frame them as...
Is it too little too late? Or do you think there are ways that we can frame it to get ahead on this?
There definitely are. The problem is it's only countries that are relatively more wealthy that can take the Japanese funded project because it's likely going to be of a higher quality, but it's also going to be more expensive. Right? Oftentimes, countries say yes to the Chinese project because it's the only game in town that they can afford. Right?
Uh-huh.
That when the U.S. and Japan and Korea start to talk about, hey, we can do this for you too, the quality goes much higher, but the price goes much higher too.
So is the idea in the Belt and Road Initiative then is that, hey, we're going to give you this money, and you're going to develop this infrastructure. You're going to pay this money back through trade favoritism or what have you, or whatever method it might come, but you're going to see way more benefit out of this investment and this essentially loan that you're going to get. Is that kind of the idea?
And it's not China being magnanimous and charitable, right? They're trying to gain from this as well. The emphasis on Belt and Road is connectivity, right? So the idea is, from China's own experience, they recognize that not having infrastructure was a key obstacle to their own economic growth. And as they built infrastructure, that was a really important part of fueling their own economic growth. And it looks around its region, looks around the neighborhood, and sees lots of poorer countries that are neighboring poorer provinces of China. And they say, hey, if we can build up their infrastructure, that will fuel their economy. And if we can build up the connections and the connectivity between our neighbors and then our poorer provinces in the West and the South, that will help China economically and will deal with the internal issues of inequality that the leadership faces. And then there's a whole lot of excess capacity that China has built up.
So they're saying, hey, this worked for us. This can work for you too. Here's some money to do it. Now be our friend and forget the United States. I'm not, that's a stretch. But, I mean, in a way, some people could interpret it pessimistically that that's an initiative to try and replace and become that global power.
No, that's absolutely right. No, that's right. I mean, so one of the concerns is China trying to build a world order that is centered on China and a return to something that is the Sinocentrism that we used to talk about in the tribute system. And when you do have the Belt and Road Initiative that has a whole lot of these roads and corridors that do connect back to China, it does make sense to at least worry that what China is trying to do is create a world order where it's in the center.
Do you think the Chinese must take a much longer, historical approach to this when they look at the world? We look maybe at the last 20 years, some of us the last century, some of us maybe just the modern world, like 1789 on, and that's our world history as we know it. How is their past influencing and informing where they envision their future?
Okay, I'm having bitter beer face because that's a nonsensical thing that I hear all of the time. Right?
Yeah?
This idea that the United States can only think of in terms of the next news cycle, whereas China is looking decades and centuries into the future.
I'm thinking decades and centuries into their past, and saying, hey, this is where we belong in the world. We've been left behind, and now we've fought our way up, and we're here now.
No, that's absolutely right. That if you look at it, the emphasis over the last 100 years from China is this concept of rejuvenation. And it's gotten a lot more emphasis under Xi Jinping, but really it goes back to Sun Yat-sen and kind of the end of the Qing dynasty. From that period on, and after the Century of Humiliation, the idea of rejuvenation, return to some sort of previous glory is absolutely driving China, and has continued to and will continue to. Now, what that actually means is still a little unclear.
Do you think that their culture and language and mindset, being more from the traditionally Eastern world, helps them coalesce their society around that idea? Because I think about that with the United States and the Western thought and mindset. And let's look at the COVID response. What it's told me is that we humans are still very, very selfish creatures, like really. But then we look at, China's response, and we can talk about whether or not we trust the information that comes out of China, sure, but little piece by piece, they stamp out any little flare up of coronavirus that comes up, and people capitulate to the man, if you will, and the order is followed. And there might be complaints, but order is followed, and look who doesn't have coronavirus anymore.
I usually push back on any of these sorts of cultural essentialism, Orientalism type arguments, but I will say I think the thread of that is at least worth thinking about a little bit more is kind of a bumper sticker of Western liberal countries care about the individual need, the individual benefit, and Eastern countries are more likely to focus on the collective good and the collective interest, and not back to your sort of selfish point. I think you can go way too far on that of talking about differences in cultures, but I think there's something to that. Now, to your COVID point, I'm not sure that is a result of the importance of the collective good. I think it's also living in an authoritarian state makes it much easier to close things down.
Do.
Exactly, right? Yeah.
And that's just give me liberty or give me death, literally in this case, I suppose.
Yeah, there weren't many protests of people saying it is against the Constitution to force me to wear a mask in China.
Right. Yeah. There's no room for that. I can see where we could go too far on that line, but I still believe that. Do you think the evidence is in there that there is cultural differences that drive some of our decision making there? And I see it in the language learning aspect. Like, I was really interested in learning Russian when I did, because I see, Russian history and the Russian language kind of bridges this gap between kind of like in sort of an Eastern and a Western mindset. Now, granted, some of these ideas that we're talking about that might be dangerous, you could say that Westerners have certainly taken nationalism way too far and farther than any others, right, in a dangerous manner. So, like, I'm not saying that it's dangerous. I'm just saying I think maybe their perspective is informed differently, and how they view the world it's harder for us to relate.
Yeah, no, I think that there's absolutely the possibility of having culture as an important factor and driver for differences in reactions, differences in policy. I think far too often we see China or another country acting differently than the West and just say, oh, it's got to be culture.
Oh, it's their culture. We can't understand it, so we'll just contain them. No, so yeah, it maybe it's the threat of the other in that case.
Well, right, and then once you otherize them, you then see them in more nefarious ways. You interpret their behavior as being more challenging and more revisionist than maybe it is.
It's easy to demonize the unknown, isn't it? Yeah.
History will tell us that.
Yes, it is.
Hopefully the future won't. But
yeah, hopefully. Yeah, we'll see. Where is the future headed that direction? No.
We're all gonna die.
That's why we're having beers.
That's right. One of the issues that I have been researching and continue to research is this question of China's international influence. There is, this returns to this idea of China is now everywhere, and I think that's right, that, China is throwing a bunch of money around the world. China's diplomats, China's military is going out more and more, and I think in both the policy world and far too much the academic world, there is a tendency to equate China's actions, China's activities as being successful in showing that it is broadening its influence over these countries, right? So the idea that China is investing a bunch of money in a country or in a region is often evidence for its increasing influence.
Why does the United States perceive that as threatening? Is it threatening? If it's not, what activities that China is taking do we see threatening for good reason? I know that was a lot of questions at once, and I'm not.
Yes, no, and maybe. I think at the most fundamental level, the idea of another actor who's not an ally, not a partner, coming in and having a much broader, stronger presence around the world is by many people seen as, at the very least, something really difficult to adjust to. And probably more fundamentally, just their presence is seen as a challenge and seen as a problem that needs to be responded to.
So in that case, so that final question I kind of threw in there is, what actions or activities are they undertaking then that the United States rightfully perceives as a threat to our national security?
So absolutely the things that they're doing in the South China Sea and the East China Sea of both challenging U.S. freedom of navigation, but also stealing resources inside other countries' EEZs with vague claims.
Or building brand new islands.
Yes, right. Yes, those. So, I think the island reclamation is a little bit more complex in terms of, is that a direct challenge to U.S. interests, right? Just because we don't like something doesn't necessarily mean it's a challenge to U.S. interests, right? Similar to the idea of the Chinese investing all around the world. Right? We don't like it, but wait, we actually do like countries not being poor. So if their investment in aid makes these countries more wealthy, is that a good thing or a bad thing? And if it's the Chinese that do it,
didn't do
exactly,
it.
Right, exactly,
so,
yeah.
That challenges us. Okay, I can see that. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think returning kind of some of those big issues is adjusting to a reality where China is more active in areas where we used to be completely uncontested, is an adjustment, is a challenge, but that's different from necessarily saying it challenges U.S. interests.
Well, in contesting some of our military dominance, if you will, do you find that as more of a balancing act? Like not to call international relations into it, but do you see that as more of a balancing effort, or as a challenge to the U.S. dominance directly?
I mean,
how do you think they see it?
I was just going to say, if you think of this from China's perspective, which you can or cannot, or you can call BS on it if you want, but China has had its recent experience been U.S. allies surrounding it, U.S. military activities on its border, an inability to control the waterways off its own coast, and as China becomes much more economically interdependent with the world and cares a lot more about SLOCs and maritime trade, having safe passage becomes that much more of an issue. So there's the economic element of that says, I don't really feel comfortable with the idea that the U.S. could maybe impose some cost in a blockade really easily. We'd like to make sure that we can ensure our own SLOCs. And then there's the security and the prestige aspect of that, right? China is now the second most powerful country in the world. It shouldn't have another country that is right on its border controlling its water.
Yeah, right? Shouldn't we be the ones ensuring freedom of navigation here? These are our waters. It's right off it's our ocean.
Right, right. And the Chinese say this all the time, that how would the United States feel if Chinese naval vessels were operating right off of San Diego, right off of Hawaii, and in the idea of freedom of navigation, allowing military vessels between 12 nautical miles and 200 nautical miles, which we consider that to be international waters. The Chinese say, well, if we were operating in there, how would you feel? Wouldn't you feel threatened? And the U.S. side often says, no, bring it on. The Soviets did that. It would be completely normal. However, when it does happen, sometimes we are a little
scramble.
We're a little
follow
concerned.
You, and we're gonna keep an eye on you, and I'm sure they keep an eye on us.
Oh, right.
I imagine that we're tailed by multiple ships every time we go through near their waters.
Yes,
Absolutely.
Yes.
I mean, I would expect that we would do the same when they come over here. Is it? Well, that's an interesting question to me. Maybe not to everybody else, but do they lack the capability to come over here and hang out in our near our waters all the time?
No, they hang out in our waters more than most people think, especially off of Hawaii. But they also don't necessarily want to directly challenge the United States, right? This is a distinction that the Chinese make repeatedly of China is not trying to challenge the United States directly, that many of the disputes that we have had in the last 10 years have been China aggressively challenging neighbors where the U.S. has an interest, but the U.S. is not a claimant in the South China Sea. The U.S. is not a claimant in the East China Sea. The Chinese say, we're not challenging the United States directly. We're responding to defend our sovereignty.
They're handling their own bilateral affairs with these other neighbors and countries.
Right, and the only reason that the United States is affected by this is because the U.S. is intruding into issues that don't directly affect it.
So the argument is that the actions speak for themselves, is that, hey, we're not trying to antagonize the United States, but they kind of feel maybe like they're being antagonized. Perhaps,
right.
Because we're there constantly all the time so much. Yeah, okay. I mean, perspectives.
And back to this idea, kind of how do the Chinese view this? I can remember when I was at NDU, we had a dialogue every year with PLA NDU, which kind of on strategic issues, and I was talking about kind of regional developments, and this was Yeah, it was right after I got at MPS. So it was April of 2010, and I was going through the list of all of the things that the Chinese had done over the previous year that seemed to suggest they were becoming a little bit more antagonistic, that they were becoming, the word at the time was assertive. And who was he at the time? It was a lieutenant commander on the Chinese side, gave his own version of that, and it was similarly a list of actions that the United States had taken that were showing that we were more antagonistic towards China, that we were now getting more involved in these territorial disputes, that we were the ones who were causing the problem, that we were, with Hillary Clinton talking about the return to Asia of the United States policy, that we were now getting deeply interfering in Chinese affairs and in regional disputes in a way that it was the U.S. who was becoming antagonistic, and the U.S. was the one who was causing the problems and becoming more assertive.
So today, in the world where we're headed, or where we are now, if you were a policy advisor in the White House, what are some policy positions you would recommend that we maintain or adopt?
Or change?
Or change, sure.
So I think what's been fascinating in the U.S. approach to China is there's the trade war vector of the U.S. approach to China that the White House cares a lot about, that Peter Navarro cares about, and there's challenging China there. And then there's the broader consensus of needing to push back on China in security affairs that is really much more consensus, whole of government. If Hillary Clinton had become president, the advisors that she would put in place would have a similar trajectory on that side of needing to push back and get tougher on China. And I think there's good reason and there's good logic to that. In my mind, the trade war is completely ill-conceived, costs the United States in many different ways. I think trying to push back on China's unfair trade practices is worth it, but we went about it completely wrong, and we should have worked together with our allies to work collectively to then put pressure on China, and that would have hurt China much more and would have improved our relations with everyone else. That I think increasingly we are in a position where a lot of the things that the United States sees as problematic from China, other countries do too. So we should work together to collectively, as best as possible, put pressure on China, recognizing that sometimes that means we need to pull some punches a little bit, that some countries might be less comfortable standing up to China in that same sort of way, but working together gives us a lot more leverage.
Sure, that was the kind of the following I was going to ask. Are there areas that you can see that we could de-escalate that wouldn't be detrimental to U.S. national security then, where you could pull those punches a little bit more? The trade war sounds like one of those areas through collective.
Yeah, I think that's one where European allies for sure would have been very happy to join with us and work with us to put pressure on China. I think what we need to avoid, especially in Asia, is forcing countries to feel like we're making them make a choice. Right? I mean, this is said all the time, but still needs to be fully understood that even when it seems like countries in Asia are like-minded with us, share common interests, also see China's activities as a challenge, they also recognize that their economic relationship, especially with China, is supremely important and perhaps more valuable than its economic relationship with the United States.
Because China's challenging doesn't make China their enemy, right?
The other thing to remember is the U.S. is not the most reliable partner, right? That we have with domestic political with domestic political changes, with different involvements in other areas of the world, right? Sometimes Asia is really important, and other times it's not. And if you're an Asian country and you say, "Do I really want to go all in with the United States?" I'm not so sure.
Well, do we have to acknowledge the reality that the United States can't rule the whole world all the time? I mean, we've felt the resources being stretched. Yeah, America, right? We can do it all. But Can we? I mean...
So in Asia, anyway, we have moved in the last 5 to 10 years away from what used to be called the hub and spokes approach in Asia, right? So in Europe, the approach is multilateral with NATO. In Asia, it was the U.S. is the hub, and we have 5 allies, and then we have relations with each of those allies, but most things go through us. We have, in part, post-financial crisis, because of those resource problems and because of our focus on other areas, we have become much more encouraging of other countries working together with security cooperation.
Sure. But China's kind of mimicking the former, aren't they? Where they're kind of trying to be the hub and have relations out and around and kind of be the center on that, right? Kind of in Asia, or would you not say that?
I wouldn't.
I mean, I'm not an Asian expert.
Yeah,
so.
no, I mean, or certainly not in the formalized way that the United States did.
Oh,
right?
okay.
I think there's a concern that that's what China is trying to do on the security implications of the Belt and Road, right? If you think of the connectivity, and it depends on your view, right? So is that connectivity everybody is connected to China, or everybody is connected to China and connected to everybody else? Right.
That's what makes geopolitical conversations so interesting. It's like, well, depends on your view. Because, so many of the other guests we might have on, it's like, well, when you
2 + 2 is
plug
4.
in the machine,
right.
it works or it doesn't. And the circuits are connected or they're not. The answer comes out, the magical box at the end, and the product works or it doesn't.
Yeah. No, and this is what is either fascinating or frustrating about the social world and international politics is, I have students who always say, do you have the textbook on that with the answers and the manual with the answers? I'm like, there aren't any clear answers for a lot of this stuff. And it's not.
So you're a constructivist. Got it. Cool. Okay.
I mean, I will say on other professions, one of the things that has really changed in the last 10 years is China affects virtually everyone now. And maybe as a result, everyone has some sort of opinion about China. Right? So the guy who cuts my hair, when he found out that I was a China guy and went to China, he goes, "Are you allowed to walk down the street free, or if you walk out of your apartment, do you get arrested?"
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and the cable repairman comes and says some nutty, crazy things about what the suppression is like in China. And
does it make you think, where are people getting their education and news?
Exactly, yes.
You've not even heard that craziness before.
No. And it's not like a CNN, MSNBC versus Fox News, OAN thing,
right? It's
right?
Where is that coming from?
Right.
Yeah. How do you think people build up these ideas in their head?
For some of them, I have absolutely no idea. But the frustrating thing as a China scholar is there's just so much information out about China now, right? Trying to follow it, trying to keep up with it, just as a profession, it's so difficult. And now, because China is more important, there's a lot more people who don't know anything at all about China writing about China. And invariably, the more popular books about China are the worst books about China.
As it happens in pop culture,
right? That's not a China-specific thing.
You always get told. I was at the beginning of my graduate experience. I was always told, the reason we focus on peer-reviewed articles and/or publications maybe out of universities is anybody can publish a book and say anything they want.
Yeah.
So just because it's in a book doesn't mean it's any good.
Right.
I think I know what I'm going to ask. You're sitting here in a Monterey Jazz Festival T-shirt. If you were in a jazz quartet, what instrument would you play?
Oh, see, I am musically, in terms of playing music, an idiot. I can barely play the piano. I've tried to take up various things over the years. It just doesn't work for me.
In a perfect world, then, what do you see yourself doing?
Sax for sure.
Yeah, like Kenny G or President Clinton style, or
I'm giving you an evil look.
You are.
Sorry.
So either. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. So for me, if I were in a jazz band and able to play instruments, it would definitely either be sax or bass. because bass is just the foundation of so
bass.
much good jazz.
There's a boom, 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 boom. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and my wife loves the bass as well. So Christian McBride, certainly one of our favorites. I saw him in Boston like 20 years ago for the first time. He's at the Jazz Festival pretty much every year.
So you can't play instruments.
Nope.
You're not a paper boy anymore. You can't play ball, apparently. Not well enough to be a professional. What else would you do?
Are you just trying to criticize me of all the things I can't do?
You're the one who said it. My goodness. What would you do right now if you weren't teaching?
If I weren't teaching, I would probably be working in a DC think tank.
Okay. Doing what? Thinking?
So doing a lot of the same sort of research.
Okay.
On China issues, on international relations issues, but without the teaching part.
So this really kind of is a passionate background for you. There's a lot of passion here, and this is what we're focused on. Like what inspired you? Is it that professor in undergrad that really drove you?
Started me in that. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so I always had a voracious appetite for learning, and I think that lit the spark to push me in the direction of being fascinated by that.
So you don't really see yourself kind of in any other vision or like region or role, or it's like this is where I went because this is what it is,
yep.
And this is like this. I don't want to say defines you. That's overly broad, but it's part of who you are.
Right. So the other answer to your question is I can't imagine what I would be doing if I was doing something different than this.
So you're where
I'm where I want to be.
You want to be. Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's
very, very lucky, very fortunate that it worked out
incredible.
That way.
Yeah. I would say I am, but normally I'm just like stuck in my house right now, alone, sitting there going, what the hell is this COVID thing?
Yeah, right, yeah. In general, I am where I want to be. The COVID part of things is a little different.
No, but being here in Monterey is great, and being an MPS student is like fantastic and wonderful. What would you what's your advice to us students? What would you, like, I mean, what do you see, what are our pitfalls and where are our successes? Like, what are our best behaviors? Where do we go wrong?
You personally?
Sure.
One of the things that I really love about teaching NPS master students, and there's a long list, is how much I respect the choices that you have made and the paths that you've taken on your careers, right? It's very different from when I was a TA and I had, 18, 19, 20-year-old snotty kids who just cared about getting into law school. This is a situation where I highly respect and value you. You are all mostly responsible adults, responsible students.
We do our best in these times.
But I am still shocked at the amount of, for lack of a better word, grade grubbing that goes on sometimes, of people who get an A- or a B+ and will bang on my door and try to talk to me repeatedly in the hopes that if they can just wear me down,
like
and I'll change
like
it.
a third grade bump or something.
Exactly, right, yeah, to change it from...
Why?
I don't know, but you are all type A, you are all overachievers, right? I mean...
That is, yeah, we are type A to a T, aren't we?
Yeah, and for a lot of students... I'm a really tough A. I don't give a lot of C's and D's, but I'm a tough A, and I'll get lots of students who will come and spend lots of time complaining about the A- that they got in my class.
I had this discussion when grades came out. I was like, he is a tough A, but I was like, he's super fair, and that was my opinion and shared. I was like, it's a really, really fair grade. I mean, it's like, yeah, I mean, even kind of generous. I mean, when you really match it up to the standard and what's expected. I mean, it's
and it's up to you. I mean, to me, it's easy to say I'm the professor, but far more important than that silly letter that you get is how much did you learn from the class?
Yeah, and certainly not
and
negotiation skills.
And how many airplanes flew by?
Yeah, how many jets are going to go over in the middle of our interview today? But that's okay. We warned people that we would have to deal with that.
Yeah. Especially for the NSA students, I think that the best advice I have, and we talked about this in class as well, is to try to learn how to read effectively and efficiently, right? I mean, yes, we, especially me, assign more reading than one could possibly do, but the expectation is not that you read every word, that you know the footnotes, that you know what's in the middle. The idea is that you read for the main arguments, for what is covered, and then if it's interesting to you, you read more. But too many people still pick up an article, start at the beginning, read it as far as they can, and then they run out of time and only touch half of the articles that they're supposed to read.
Well, you gave me a bit on China, to read last night, and the time I had, I was like, well, intros and conclusions. Here
exactly.
We go.
Right.
Let's see where those line up and mismatch and what adds on, and we'll see if I can't ask some smartish questions.
Right, and that's it's the time management issue that is the biggest challenge, right? I sort of talked about loving having you guys as students, as adults, not 18, 19, 20-year-olds, but time management is a different issue for you, since many of you are married, have kids, that the post-class time evening period is not completely open like if you're an undergrad.
I don't know how those people do it. You're married.
Yep, but married but no kids.
What's your wife's name?
Jenny.
How do you two get on? Where'd you guys meet?
We met, back to your question of do I consider myself a nerd? We met at a summer class at Northwestern the summer after our freshman year of high school.
Wow.
Yes.
Nice.
Yes.
So you guys go
right
all the way back.
Yes. We haven't been dating since then. We dated for a couple of years in college. And then, as we've talked about distance and relations in the past, I was at Cornell, she was at Northwestern. It was great for 2 years, kind of ran its course. Had a couple of years where we weren't together, then got back together again in 2001, and have been together happily, lovely ever since.
Yeah. Dogs or cats or anything?
We're going to move in the direction of getting a dog, since I'm so close to the beach. Walking the dog on the beach is gonna be pretty sweet.
That's a new favorite activity for anybody that has a dog.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite dog breed?
Looking in the direction of a lab, I think, should just be energetic and a lot of fun.
Energetic,
exactly.
Yeah. Plenty.
Yeah, like the perfect.
If you like walking,
perfect coastal California beach dog.
If you like walking on the beach, a lab is for you.
Yeah.
So when you look back, then, NPS students are a different story. When you look back at your 23, 22-year-old self, just after undergrad, what would you tell that guy? What's Mike Glosny doing right then that he should have maybe done differently?
If I had to go back and do it all over again, I think I would have preferred to take some time off between undergraduate and graduate school.
What would you have done in China for those couple of years?
Probably would have taught English like everyone else does when you first go over there. Teach English and then do language classes on the side, and just kind of have enough to get by and have fun, learn the language, see how much you like the country, mature a little bit. I think I was pretty immature once I started the PhD program.
What would you tell people who want to visit?
Not that I'm mature now. But.
What would you tell people who want to visit China today? Because I can imagine there's people out there who think, oh my gosh, we're so adversarial. Is it safe for me to go over there? What are they going to think of me as an American, especially in the military? What do you tell
Yeah,
us?
Safety isn't the worry. It's a much less pleasant place to visit than it was 10, 20 years ago.
Is it?
Yeah, in my experience. In part, that's because of the overall adversarial nature of the relationship. In part, you just need to be so much more careful with your technology, with your information, with your computer, because you're just assuming that anything you bring into the country
is now compromised.
Is now compromised. Yeah.
Oh, that's sad.
Yeah.
Oh.
But it's the reality, right? I mean, I adjust to it. I have dedicated China computers that I only use for that and then wipe them. But if you're a business person trying to get into China, you need to make sure that you're guarding all of your proprietary information, and that's just not that pleasant. On a more professional note, as under Xi Jinping, there has been a lot more pushback on foreign ideas and the influence of foreign ideas, and a lot more worry about the relationship, lots of my interlocutors and colleagues who I've known for 20 years now, they're a little more reluctant to interact with foreigners, and they're a little bit more reluctant to interact with me. They often have to fill out long reports afterwards after interacting with foreigners, and it's risky for them.
Understandable. Yeah, no, that's kind of sad. I was kind of hoping to like, hey, no, if you want to visit China, go for it.
No, it's still
the truth. The reality is
it's still fantastic. I mean, so my wife came over to visit twice, but hasn't been back in 15 years, and she keeps saying, "Should I go back? Should I go back?" And I'm like, let's just go somewhere in Southeast Asia where it's much more pleasant and much more fun.
Tell me, what's maybe the dumbest or silliest thing you've done professionally or personally? It could be fun, silly, it could be like truly dumb, and how that turn out.
I mean, okay, so it's probably broader, and the answer is probably going to be a little more serious than silly and dumb, but whatever.
Yeah.
So as a professor, right, you know me from the classroom,
right?
But the teaching part is a small part of our job, right? When you get hired as a professor and you're on the tenure track, the most important thing you need to do is publish your book, publish articles,
research,
right? Yeah, the teaching is a distraction.
Oh my God, students!
You're wasting my time and getting in the way. Back to the idea of me being a voracious reader, right? The biggest mistake that I have made is professionally is not publishing enough, not writing enough. That I get much more joy out of sitting up in my office with a scotch at midnight, going through Chinese language stuff and taking notes on it. That I enjoy that much more than like the production and the writing. And one of the core functions of what I was hired to do, of publish books and publish articles, I haven't been as successful at as I should have been. What it has meant is that I now have moved to a different role where I do more teaching, which is great because I love the teaching.
That's what you
right?
love.
I mean, you've seen me in the classroom. We talk about passion. That's where it comes from.
Not even in a classroom, just on Zoom.
That's right.
Yeah,
the fake classroom.
Well, yeah, even on Zoom it comes across. On a more serious note, I would say that you were one of my, maybe I shouldn't say this, favorite professors, out there on Zoom, because you just handled that environment tremendously. It's a very difficult hurdle for a lot of professors and for a lot of students. I don't think we get the same out of it. Absolutely not.
Yeah,
we don't get the same out of it. We lose so much in that online environment. But you adapted tremendously well, I think.
And I was surprised at how relatively easy it was to get conversation going and get discussion going. It was a little clunky sometimes.
What have you heard that other professors do that is just like doesn't work? Tell them, like right now, what are you going to tell other professors? What's your advice to them in the Zoom environment?
I mean, professors have such a different range of how they teach their classes, even face-to-face, right? So, you've been here long enough that some professors, no matter what the class is, they're giving you 2 hours of lecture with PowerPoint with an occasional interrupt to ask a question. Right?
Sure.
That's not my approach. That's not my view of the way graduate school and master's education should work with a small class. We should be exploring ideas together and learning from each other. But there are still people who, what they have done as they transition to the Zoom environment is just record their long lectures, post it on there, and then the good thing about
meet at all in Zoom.
I'm
sorry. Yeah,
the good part about that is it gives you flexibility, right? So this whole synchronous versus asynchronous approach. If it's discussion, then I need everybody there, right? If it's just listening to a lecture, then you can listen to
their ideas online.
Right. Yeah.
Come back to it in a week.
Yeah, exactly.
What have you?
Exactly.
Yeah, the problem with that is that you need all that time to do that. Like, you need longer than a 10-week quarter to have a class in that case, if you ask me. But we're constrained by the system that we're in. right? We have constraints. Just as well
Yeah,
as
I mean,
we
it's
have
it's I don't know if it's advice on the Zoom environment or advice on teaching on Zoom, and in our current environment, it's to really recognize what a difficult time this is for everybody, including the students, right?
Yeah.
And
including the professors.
Well, right.
So it goes both ways.
Yeah, but in terms of what our assignments are and what our expectations are and all of those sorts of things and how much information we can convey, you can't convey as much over Zoom as you could when you were meeting in person. So it's adjusting to that and recognizing that.
All right, Professor Mike Glosny, we've got a little bit more beer to go.
Sweet.
You've taught me and really changed my thinking on China today, which is sort of the point of all of this. Is like, I'm interested. Cheers to you.
Yeah, we'll drink these in Waikiki sometime.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds great.
Thanks for joining us in the Trident Room. This episode was recorded on July 17th, 2020. For more information about today's guests and topics, please visit the show notes. The Trident Room has been brought to you by the Naval Postgraduate School Alumni Association and Foundation. For questions, comments, and suggestions, please email us at tridentroompodcasthost@nps.edu and find us online at nps.edu/tridentroompodcast.